People are being born and dying all the time.
They do not make religious statistics in India, do they?
That's a very good question. I mean, I think the British did, or tried to when we were there. I'm not sure what they're doing now. Because, of course, it's quite political, because it relates to the voting. And if you have, I know that, and it's happening in America, if you have a particular ideology and you want to purge the voter registration, of the people you think will vote against you. And so a lot of Muslims have found themselves not voting. They've been purged from the under the Modi extremist thing. That's why I was sitting on this panel, as scholars of political science worried about that, because that's wrong. It's what the Trumpites were doing in the South in America, purging black voters from the voting lists. It's totally wrong in my opinion. But anyway, there we are. That's Jainism. Victory. So may there be victory for all of us, mankind, in a peace civilization. Okay, any questions about Jainism? It's fascinating stuff. Right. Okay, let's move on then to our final little practice, and let's go back to the gods, because we love the gods, and they're all in the pack. I wish somebody would make a tarot of the goddess. Can some scholar out there, Starhawk or someone, do a companion volume, 1,000 pages of text on all the goddesses of all the religions of history? I'm going to leave that to you, Starhawk, or someone. You get a team going, and that would be amazing. Because we need the goddesses to balance these gods. I'm happy to be a consultant to that project, but I can't take the lead on it. There are enough amazing, feminist theologians and scholars out there. Pagans, Wiccans, witches, Druids, Hindus, all the goddess followers of history. They're all back on Earth now, I think. Okay, let me offer one to you. Oh, you got one. Okay. Right. And then let's do one here.
I don't see the name. Great architect, but...
Oh, can you pass me those 2 volumes there, the tarot books? Great.
It's heavy.
I know, there's a lot of work in here, years of research. Yes. So this is, this is pretty cool. This is the one of the major arcana, as they're called, number 21, which is the last one of the whole lot. In the traditional tarot, it's called the World. It's a very auspicious card, and in the gods, it had to be, musing upon it in depth, had to be what is called the Great Architect, who's invoked in Freemasonry.
Yeah.
And so you have Masonic symbols around the edge. Because the Great Architect is a sort of a word for the divine intelligence behind them all, behind all the gods. So he's the last of the major arcana. The World stands for completion, wholeness, attainment, and celebration of life. And the concept of God as an architect is very ancient. Probably goes back to the beginning of, first structures we all built in Egypt, China, Mesopotamia. In Egypt, he was called Ptah, who was regarded as the god of architects. And every civilization has eulogized, architects. In Hinduism, it's Vishvakarman. He's the god of architecture. I once had a fantastic conversation with an architect in South India, in Chennai, Madras, who knew all about the temple structure of the Indian tradition in South India, where they have these incredibly complex temples. And they're all laid out according to this sacred architecture, aligned with the directions and so on. and it's a whole science in India. So I have a book called Freemasonry and the Ancient Gods by J.S. Ward, who was in India as a British civil servant and scholar, and he explains how Brahma is really the great architect of the universe. But Vishnu and Shiva are also part of it, because the whole universe is needing that threefold, maintenance crew, let's call it. In the Druid work, Gavanan is the god of architecture we had in the Celtic world. And so Stonehenge and Avebury are some of the oldest stone buildings in Europe, the oldest and the biggest temples. So Gavanan was regarded as their architect. In the Greek world, it was Daedalus. He was the artificer or architect to the gods. He built the labyrinth on Crete. And he was, if you needed anything making, you went to Daedalus. He made an invisible net that captured Aphrodite when she was having an affair with Ares, which was very naughty of her. And that's quite interesting, because Aphrodite, the goddess of love, shouldn't be, in my opinion, making love to war. And I think we need Daedalus's net to come back, because we need the women of the planet to speak up against war. Most of them are already doing it, but their voice needs to be amplified. So if Daedalus would like to remake a net, that would be good. In Plato, the great architect is the artificer in the Timaeus. He's like the demiurge who forged this world, created it and designed it. Obviously good at maths. You also have the same idea in ancient Hermetic traditions in Egypt. So, and the Freemasons ran with all this, and they thought, I think it was Francis Bacon and his team at the court of King James, they said, and also Queen Elizabeth, they said, well, how can we bring humanity into harmony? I tell you what, let's go with the great architect theme, and let's build a sort of universalist wisdom tradition that contains all the best bits of all of them. One of the great poets, George Herbert, who influenced me as a young poet, wrote a book called The Temple, on God as an architect. I'll just read that poem briefly, because I love George Herbert, who was a Christian poet in the 1600s. It's called The Church Floor. Mark you the floor, that square and speckled stone, which looks so firm and strong, is patience. And the other, black and grave, wherewith each one is checkered all along, humility. The gentle rising, which on either hand leads to the choir above, is confidence. But the sweet cement, which in one sure band ties the whole frame, is love and charity. Hither sometimes sin steals, and stains the marble's neat and curious veins. But all is cleansed when the marble weeps. Sometimes death, puffing at the door, blows all the dust about the floor. But while he thinks to spoil the room, he sweeps. Blessed be the architect, whose art could build so strong, in yet so weak a heart. That's an amazing poem. And the Freemasons of the Christian, dispensation believe that Christ is an embodiment of the great architect. And it is a fact that he was not just a carpenter. In the Gospel of Matthew and elsewhere, he's called the tecton. Father Joseph and him were tectons, meaning they were architects and builders in Galilee. That was his craft. And I think he became a builder of hearts, as George Herbert says. So anyway, why has it come today? Well, I think we have to build. I mean, there's a word we use in peace work called peace building. And look at all the buildings that have been shattered and destroyed in Gaza and all across Ukraine, in other parts of the world, in Khartoum. And that's before we even talk about earthquakes and things, like in Kathmandu. We have to start building again instead of destroying. It's so stupid that we're destroying things. I'm a great fan of Chevalier Ramsay, who was a great Freemason here in France, who gave an oration in 1737 in Paris at Saint-Germain-en-Laye called The Discourse Pronounced at the Reception of Freemasons. And he stressed the order's desire to unify humanity through the love of virtue. And he said the following, he said, the obligations imposed on you by the Order of Freemasons are to protect your brothers by your authority, to enlighten them by your knowledge, to edify them by your virtues, to suffer them in their necessities, to sacrifice all personal resentment, and to strive after all that may contribute to the peace and unity of society. We desire to unite all men and women of enlightened minds, gentle manners, and agreeable wit, not only by a love of the fine arts, but much more by the grand principles of virtue, science, and religion, where the interests of the fraternity shall become those of the whole human race, whence all nations shall be enabled to draw useful knowledge, and whence the subjects of all kingdoms shall learn to cherish one another without renouncing their own country. That's just a tiny bit of this marvellous oration which has come down to us. Somebody recorded it, he wrote it. He was actually Scottish. I discovered him when I lived in Scotland. And he was a Jacobite, so he came to Paris and he was a friend of King James II and the French king. And these guys were basically behind the French Enlightenment. So how can knowledge help rebuild the shattered fabrics? That's the question I think this card represents, the great architect. We're all humble, builders alongside that project, I think. As was Napoleon. Okay, any questions about this card, the great architect? Then we'll do this one. If you haven't been to Saint-Germain-en-Laye, anyone, go to the Museum of Ancient Archaeology in France. It's the National Museum of Archaeology, because it's in the palace that King James II lived in. They've turned it into a museum, and it has all the Celtic and Druid ancient finds throughout France there. Absolutely a dream, worth visiting, and you can, and in the church in the middle of Saint-Germain, I think it's where he gave his lecture, Chevalier Ramsay. Okay, now let's return to this one. This is another very important card. This is another major arcana, so we've got the big boys out today. This one is the Moon, card number 18, which stands for mystery, the subconscious, and dreams, which is very appropriate because I'm working on a book of dreams at the moment. But in the musing which God to put on the moon, it had to be Allah. Allah, the God of Islam, because there are many reasons for that, because Allah is symbolized. I mean, you can't make a drawing of Allah. Allah has no symbol. But the moon is on the top of all the mosques, and the Islamic calendar goes with the moon. It's not a solar calendar. And Ramadan, for instance, is which is being observed now in the Islamic world, is governed by the moon. When I observed Ramadan strictly with a Muslim guest here one year, not long ago, we were allowed to eat after you could see the moon in the evening. There's the sun goes down. So I believe Muhammad was in the kind of lunar thinking world when the moon is sacred in the Middle East because it's too hot to move around in the day. No one with any sense goes out. You come out in the evening. And so the moon was very sacred to them. And this, I think, is true also to Moses, who was greatly revered in Islam as a prophet. I believe he was a devotee of Yah, who was the moon god, later called Khonsu or Thoth. And I think this explains why both Islam and Judaism love technical knowledge, geometry, mathematics, algebra. It was Muslims who invented algebra because that all came from studying the moon and its phases because it's so complicated. Our earliest ancestors made notches in bones to study the moon, and I think that Allah is the Lord of all that, and so the moon card stands for intuition and the development of psychic gifts, our spiritual inner work, and Islam is very comfortable with all that. The Quran is a text which came from this place of deep psychic intuition into God's innermost nature, and as guidance for us. So there's a lot of why has it come now? I think that we were talking about the conflicts in the world. I think it's to do with the fact that real healing will only come when we heal the subconscious causes of these conflicts. If you can get in Putin's psyche, Russia ever since it first came into being in Moscow, under Archbishop Macarius, who declared Moscow the Third Rome, has been at war with Islam. It sees its identity as defeating Islam. Archbishop Macarius was a very strict Orthodox Christian who organised Ivan the Terrible. Can you imagine? Ivan the Terrible was afraid of him, and he ordered the colonisation of Siberia in the name of Christianity. But it was all done as a way of getting at the Muslims. What would it be like if we could make peace between, say, Moscow and Allah? What if the great Russian scholars, I've met some of them, they're great philosophers, could study the Tarot of the Gods and realise, actually, that chap Thomas, who we elected coordinator of Philosophers of Peace back in 1990, he's been busy on working out how we can have a meta-synthesis. We don't need to have war anymore. We don't need to fight the Ukrainians. We don't need to fight the Muslims. We don't need to fight anyone, the British. We can come out and celebrate life and enjoy the moon together. Because I know that's what my Muslim friends want. And I know that's what, every nation wants. As Chevalier Ramsay said in his oration, all humanity wants to serve that common wisdom. But I think what this card means is we're not going to do it only at a superficial level. We won't get diplomats to sign, they can't even agree to meet, let alone sign a ceasefire. What we the people can do is we can use our dreams, our prayers, our unconscious work to craft an unstoppable, peace strategy if we focus all on collective enlightenment. Going back to what I was saying earlier. And that's why I keep a very detailed dream diary. It's like I'm doing a work here. When I'm dead and gone in, decades to come, I want that to be laid down as a sort of this is what one chap was dreaming. Because together we're all dreaming up a new world. And our dreams are often, we have synchronicities, strange things come. To take another example, there's the famous night journey of Muhammad, when he was in Mecca asleep. Says his wife Aisha, who was there in bed with him, and said he never left the bed all night long. He was asleep, but he did a night journey in his astral body to Jerusalem, because he recounted it. And then from there, he ascended up to the seven heavens, and there he met all the prophets of previous generations, including, Jacob and Jesus and Moses. Now, this was a dream vision Muhammad was having. It doesn't make it not real, in my opinion, but it sort of explains it psychologically. I mean, there are some people that say, no, it was real, and he rode on a horse. But that goes against the testimony of his wife, who said, no, he never left my bed all night. I go with her. So I think that's another example. Muhammad was very psychic, telepathic, as are many Sufis in the literature, people like Ibn Arabi. They've had these, Sufis are telepathic, it's how they teach. I'm slightly cheating by recording it and putting it on YouTube. I should just do it telepathically, but, one has to go with the flow. So anyway, that's why I think we got Allah coming in, which is these two have to work together. Because at the moment we've got war declared by the Freemasons on Islam. I mean, Tony Blair and the people that did the invasion of Iraq 2003 were mostly Freemasons. They thought Islam's the enemy because they're all primitive, and so let's go and defeat them, Well, that was a very foolish move, in my opinion. Likewise, some of the extremist Muslims think the Freemasons are the enemy. And going even back to World War II, when Hitler declared war on the Freemasons, he killed as many as he could in France and Czech Republic, wherever he could find Freemasons, he put them to the concentration camps because he hated them, because they were tolerant to all religions. You can be a Freemason, you can be a Christian or a Jew or a Hindu. So Hitler didn't like that. And some of the extremist Muslims of his day supported Hitler because of that. And so they've declared war, and a lot of the Putin propaganda has come from that. It's anti-globalist, anti-Masonic, stuff, without knowing the first thing about the real history of it, what it actually stood for. It's just so there's a huge war going on at the moment, on both sides. And I think we're not going to save this planet unless we heal it, are we, Bishi? What do you think? Yeah? We have to heal this conflict. Because, and it's only through beauty, isn't it? You know that. Anyway, that's my interpretation of these cards. So any questions or comments? There are...
As a conclusion, you spoke about globalism. And I start to understand why we don't agree politically. Because it looks like you are looking for, it seems for me, you are looking for a synthesis and for a kind of humanity, enlightened. And for me it's close to globalism.
Yeah, I don't see globalism as a dirty word. It's become so over the last 10 or 20 years. And there's whole websites on the internet against globalists.
Yeah.
I don't follow that train of thought. I think that is a deliberate misinformation that people have been fed.
Of course. It's a word, so anybody could.
It's been given the wrong meaning.
Giving a meaning to the word.
Yeah, but I like the globe. Okay, let me just explain where I'm coming from. So I'm with Shakespeare. I was an actor, a Shakespearean actor when I was a boy, right? And he had a theatre called the Globe. The point of the Elizabethan Renaissance at the time of Shakespeare was to celebrate the world as the handiwork of God, to travel about and learn science and develop knowledge and trade, and that's the birth of our understanding of the globe. And to me, art depends on that free movement of people around the world. I don't want boundaries, borders to be shot, travelling to another country. Okay, fast forward. I set up in 1991 the International Institute of Peace studies and global philosophy. Using that word again, right?
Yeah.
Now, what I meant by that is for the whole world. The word globe just means the whole world, right? And I'm an international specialist in global philosophy. I believe that's necessary and a good thing. So if that makes me a globalist, I hope I'm a good one. I think there are good globalists. There may be bad ones. I don't
I
quite know what
suspend
they are.
judgment.
I don't know what the bad ones would be, but you know,
I have
people
no-
like Elon Musk.
Yeah, I'm not judging you. I'm just happy to dig in
Yeah.
what you.
No,
you're
it's
in.
important to
Yeah,
understand where
yeah,
I come from.
of
I'm
course.
happy to be transparent
yeah,
here.
yeah.
But so since 1991, I've been running this Institute for Peace Studies and Global Philosophy. That's where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
I hope I'm a good globalist, you know. And my colleague, I think she's called Claire Belinsky, who runs a Substack channel very critical of Trump and Musk and what they're doing, deliberately, provocatively called it the cosmopolitan globalist, which is like, oh, we hate that, bring them down. But actually, she's an intellectual. She lives in Paris. She's American. Her dad was a philosopher. You know. So I believe in that tradition of that's, and it was founded by Pythagoras, who travelled about the globe.
Yeah, and I
Wisdom.
guess French Enlightenment is
Part of that
100% in that.
Yeah, and Chevalier
Vision,
Ramsay was a
yeah.
very important part of it. And I think we need more of that, not less. But truly, you know, at the wisdom level.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think that's why we got these cards, Allah and Great Architect. So may this be an auspicious draw today. And bless. Okay. Well, thank you. Let's finish there. Thank you for your questions
Thanks.
and comments, and thank you, Bishy, for joining us.